Yeah, that's good.
All
All
right.
right. So today I was actually tangentially discussing this with Kai, and I thought it would be good to get this conversation. I think it's not get this conversation started, but check in on this topic because we need to keep talking about this. And now, especially, so I don't know if this was already announced in, no, not in the code review channel, but it was just announced in the UX call. So Annabelle, she will be moving as a product designer from, oh, I don't remember, but from the secure stage to the code review group permanently. So we're going to have two designers permanently in the code review group, me and Annabelle. That means more work for you, Amy.
I did not have my video on in that meeting.
Yes,
Carry
more.
on.
But if it helps, I will be less involved in the detailed work. So yeah, more giving feedback, but I don't think it will be more issue work or merge requests work for you necessarily. Anyway, this is going to be good. She will, I should have actually written that in the agenda. Let me write that. So Annabelle will join us permanently as product designer from 14.3 onwards. The 14.2 milestone will be used to aid with the transition. So we have a bit of room here to start thinking about the long-term UX priorities. I think that the work that we did surveying the internal population and the external user population was very good in understanding how users were seeing the problems with the current experience of code review. But of course, it's just an input. There are other inputs. But nonetheless, this has allowed us to focus the group in the short term for the performance work. And everyone's really focused on that, not only from an engineering perspective, but also the UX perspective. I'm working with Anne, our UX researcher, to help us measure the MR's perceived performance and just get more information about performance in general from a user experience standpoint and get that organized so that we can make better decisions. So, but performance right now is a big topic. But going forward, we have to think about the other priorities and how we're going to line them all up. Yeah, before I proceed forward about the first thing that I talked about, Annabelle joining us permanently, any questions at the moment?
I'll hold my comments till the end of the meeting because they're on a tangent. Carry on.
Okay. Feel free to write them down. Yeah, Kai, any questions or thoughts?
I'm excited. I think we had reasonably good success with 2 for the last few months, and so I'm excited that we're going to get to continue that in the group. I think this is a group that demands more focus, and so I'm glad that's being recognized and we're getting it. So I'm happy.
Yeah,
we're also getting Annabelle, which is like pretty crazy because she is also one of like the original GitLab designers who has been here for approaching 5 years, and so
yeah, that's
like amazing.
She was originally a front-end engineer at GitLab, and she transitioned to a designer. And when she did that, when we were first assigned to stages at GitLab designers, in the beginning it was when God created Earth, everything was crazy and designers ran everywhere chaotically. But then we were assigned to stages. And when that happened, I was assigned to the plan stage. And Annabelle, when she transitioned from front end to design, she came to work with me. So me and Annabelle, we were actually the first two designers for plan. And then we went our ways, me to code review, and then eventually she went to secure. And now we're back together. And so she has this amazing quality that she is able to empathize with from the engineering side very well, because she used to be an engineer at GitLab and used code review for that. So it's amazing. And she's very, very excited about that. And we were all jumping in up and down in the UX call just now. So yeah, anyway, with the work that we're doing now for performance during this quarter, which I assume that it will not end in this quarter, and we will keep pushing for it nonetheless, but it's a very ambitious goal that we have for this quarter with the OKR. How do we foresee the balance of new features, the tech and UX depth, the bugs, the performance that we're doing, and also other polish work? It's a big question. Or we can leave that question to the end after we go through the other things.
I have phrased in this way, the way I have typically tried to run product groups at GitLab is, I think it's important. I think it's important for the product. I think it's important for the people that work in the group. I think it's important for product managers and designers that there's always some feature work happening, because I think it's a balancing act. And what I've tried to do, and I think if you look at like our planning over the last several milestones, it's been close, but we try and keep like 1 to 2 like direction driving feature issues in, because I think it signals sort of like where we're going and what we're doing. But I don't try and like build out an entire milestone for that. I think like it's important to have something that shows what we're thinking about and what we're talking about, because it gives people excited and does all of those things. The flip side of that is we have so many tech and UX debt, and we have bugs, and we have performance, and we have polish, and there's a lot of that, and we only have a finite amount of capacity. And so I'd like to keep doing things that way, but I recognize that, like, I think this milestone, there's not a single feature. I don't even think the last milestone had like a single feature issue in it outside of like some design things that we were talking about. And so I think there's times where we can't do that, but I would like to keep moving on some of it. But recognizing that these other things are more important, I guess, is maybe how I think about that.
Yeah, I understand. Do we have an idea? Yeah, and I think it also helps keep the team's morale, and that people are not just working and polishing things that were already there, that they're also making shiny new things that maybe in the beginning they're not that shiny, but they look shiny because they're new. Yeah, I understand that. Do we, to help with that, do we have an idea of how to best prioritize those new features? And the reason I ask this is when we look at the results from those internal and external surveys, that again, they're inputs from what we would like to think a representative audience of the users, but they're not necessarily the people that will buy GitLab or upgrade because of certain features. And one thing that we thought was very important for our users was to build more features around reviewers. And for example, at the bottom 3 problems, we have finding appropriate reviewers for an MR. And there are a couple of other problems that we thought ranked higher, and they don't. And again, this is just an input. So what I'm thinking here is, would it be possible for us to align so let me rephrase that. We also have the most popular issues. Like there are a lot of new feature work that people are upvoting, and we want this, and this is annoying, and this is breaking our workflows, and we would like to have this so we can transition to GitLab, and so on and so on. And then we also have customer requests or prospective customer requests. How can we consolidate all of this and not necessarily make everyone happy, but it seems to me that the biggest yeah, I'll stop there. How can we consolidate all of that, basically, all of these things, and understand what is the best balance and where we should prioritize those new features?
I have a couple thoughts. I guess in the absence of incredibly clear signals, that's why you and I exist, is to use our guts and make some decisions. That's why I have a job, I suppose. I think the other piece is sometimes people don't, maybe we could call this the Steve Jobs effect or the Apple effect, right? Sometimes people don't know what they need or what they don't have. And we're trying to think ahead, or we're thinking through problems differently than what people explicitly state. And we do that a lot, right? People say that it's interesting that I mean, we could debate this forever, but finding appropriate reviewers for an MR was really low, across the board, internally and externally. And yet we get into these conversations, or I hear from customers all the time, well, how do I know who's supposed to approve this, right? And they don't say who's supposed to review it. They say who's going to approve this, or who can merge this, or you hear these phrased differently. And so I think people maybe don't relate concepts the same way that we sort of think about them. And so I think I hesitate to say this, this is a terrible term, but tastemaker sort of, right, is what that is our job, is to curate that list. And so I think one of the ways we do that is we need to make sure that we're putting enough new things into the product in sort of different areas to get the feedback that we think we're missing. Adding the checkbox, we talked about this morning, adding the view checkbox, opened up all these sort of other things that people wanted and needed. And it was sort of like a can of worms, but we wouldn't have known those sort of next things unless we did the first one. And we can now look at that and go, yeah, I mean, that's nice, but maybe we don't need to go do all those things. Or we can be tolerant of sort of the state of where it is, because it's not broken. It just, maybe there's some other things. And so part of this, and what I like about GitLab, is sort of doing those little things, because we do get that feedback, right? That is the important pieces of iteration. I think the other thing we have to do is we have to look at these surveys and we have to look at the popular issues. And if we talk about like dealing with large MRs or those other things, I mean, dealing with large MRs, we're addressing that sort of right now via performance, but we've also talked about like, what are sort of like the crazy, like, what if we got rid of all the tabs? What if we change sort of the paradigm of the ways reviews worked? And so like a large MR wasn't a thing anymore because we've shifted sort of like how all those views work. And I think that's sort of the difference. I don't know if that answers like, how do we best prioritize this? But I think to me, it's making sure that we're exploring enough areas that we're enabling ourselves to get feedback. And then in areas where we have, I think, a good gut feel or a good understanding, like we need to make sure that we're pushing sort of like our entire vision through on those. And I think like reviewers is a good example. I think there was a strong opinion, prior to me getting here, that like reviewers needed to be like a separate thing on the sidebar. And I think I agree with that. And I think that's good. The next step was like finding appropriate reviewers. And we were going to spend more time on sort of making that list smarter, right? We talked about adding like information about free busy when that got added by manage. We talked about adding subject matter expertise and like, how could we bring more data in to make that list better? But we didn't do that. We sort of like got it to a point where we could wait and get feedback. And it seems like people don't necessarily want that yet. And so I think there's, I don't know. I think we've got to, this is also like, I don't want to say this either, but like, put a bunch of like paint on the canvas or like throw things at the wall and see what sticks and what doesn't stick, in an area that is so big and has so much opportunity, right? Like there's so many things we could do. I don't know that we'll ever have like a great signal on the most important thing to do, given the way that we deal with telemetry and other usage data. Like we're so reliant on qualitative feedback from users because of our telemetry situation that like, I think it's a blessing and a curse. It gives us a lot more freedom to dig into things that we think are interesting or important. Also means we'll miss sometimes and we won't solve the right problems. And I think that's okay too.
Yeah, I actually think that I think we've been doing that for too long. So the throwing at the wall and seeing what sticks, and what I've seen is for example, in one milestone, let's imagine we throw like 3 things at the wall. And now what if the 3 of them stick, right? And that's what I've seen, is that sometimes you actually deliver things that different people want, and now you have self-assigned yourself more maintenance and more enhancement work on those things, but yet you were only trying to see if it stuck, and it did. But now it's like you signed a contract and now you have to follow through with it.
You're talking about dark mode.
Yeah, that's a great example. Actually, that's a great example. We just saw if it worked, and it kind of did, and that's what people wanted. But we keep doing that multiple times, and I think we talk about that being iteration, and in a way it is. But I think we end up iterating in too many directions at the same time, while also not foreseeing what the next iterations could be. So when we release an iteration, we're like, well, wait, let's wait for feedback. Let's not do anything. And then we get feedback, but we're already planning these other things. And now we have to scramble to change our prioritization and scramble to find a design and scramble to find a technical solution for something that we didn't foresee. And now we're stuck in this iteration loop. Okay, would it be crazy if the way for us to iterate in this very large group that has a very large scope and can do so many amazing things would be just to pick one or two problem spaces and research them, figure out what would be some reasonable iterations, and go after those iterations and learn in the middle of those iterations, but always within that problem space. Everything outside of that problem space, we would not pursue until we have had some confidence that this problem space is well solved. Like, it's not perfect. We could do so many more things, but it's well solved. And people will still ask things, but now we're going to dedicate ourselves to these other two problem spaces. Like, for example, merge options. We have that problem that people keep talking about with the squash commits. And we created that, or you created that issue, Kai, of configuring the default behavior, the squash commit message. And now we have a merge request from a community contributor to create templates for the merge commit message. And then we also have the default target branch. And some milestones ago, we shipped a setting that allows you to deny, encourage, or require squashing on every merge request. And all of these things, to me, they all belong to the same problem space. But we didn't do any exploration. We didn't do any research on the problem space, and we didn't define a vision for that. That would also allow engineers to feel excited and to plan how technically we would do it. So I'm not very confident on the see what sticks approach, because I think that's what got us here.
I think that's fair. I don't think I think part of seeing what sticks is knowing where you want to stop. Like how far you want to take it or how far you want to go. And I think I don't know, to me, that's one of the things, I guess, like, I don't know, I'm going to keep talking about reviewers because it's really the only thing I've even remotely sort of shipped as a feature here. But like joined a group and picked up someone else's feature and then like did other work, but we'll use it anyway. So like if you think about reviewers, like one of the things that like I did was I took the epic, and the epic had like all these other epics inside of it and sub things. And I was sort of like, well, let's like figure out where we're drawing the line and like closing the epic. And to me, like I prefer to keep those epics sort of finite in scope and much more problem focused to like get to the closing of the epic. Like we still haven't closed. Actually, I don't think I've closed the reviewers epic. I need to go look. And it might be I haven't closed like the top level one. I think I closed like the sub one after I moved everything around. But like to me, that's really important. And I think this group has historically not done a good job of that, which is why I think we potentially feel that like we put things that stick. But like I have, I guess, I think about this in terms of like multiple simultaneous work streams, and I am more tolerant of that in terms of like features. Like I prefer us to have, 2 or 3 sort of areas, and I think that aligns like that we're we're working on and moving forward, but like we have a sort of clear end state in mind of where we want to get to, and then we sort of stop. What I don't like about sort of what you were saying is like, let's go deep into a couple areas, because I think just going deep based on the way that I have seen this group operate and what I know about sort of like how development works inside of GitLab, it scares me to go incredibly deep into things, only because we end up in these states where people are like, well, let's refactor sort of all of this first, and like not do anything that helps us like move the ball forward on the vision that we want to accomplish, right? Like one of the fears of like the merge button when you started working on that was sort of like, well, if we have to re-architect everything, like this becomes a much bigger problem than like, can we move existing components around? And like when we need new things, like let's try and figure those out. So I don't know, I guess like, yeah, throwing things at the wall and seeing what sticks is not the right, like one or two issues worth of work is not the right answer. Like we need to have a good like end state we want to get to when we are, I think, investing more time. But I think it's also okay to throw like an occasional thing out. And otherwise we just don't get any feedback on it, right? Like the way our telemetry, as a not data-driven ever product manager, it's sort of frustrating to be in a situation where like we have some data, but we don't have the right kinds of data or the right way to think about our data to like actually make a ton of use out of it. It sort of is just like a point in time amount of data. And so like, to me, it just makes me much more reliant on like engaging in issues and seeing what people are saying and talking to customers versus like trying to, and the only way you get that is if there's something for them to talk about. No one talks about the things that don't exist. And so you've got to at least have something for them to like get their head going in the space of the thing that doesn't even exist sometimes.
Yeah. I understand. I think you talked about two things. One is going too deep and then people get in those conversations. So now we have to refactor everything. I think, yeah, I tend to agree. But when you know the ideal end state, and ideal is a balance here, I think it would be easier for us to break that ideal state into smaller iterations that drive us toward that ideal. And maybe the refactor is needed for us to get to that ideal. Maybe it doesn't. And maybe that's something that we can push back on engineering to do. And related to your second point about learning, and maybe we just want to throw something so that we can learn if people actually want this. I think that goes back to knowing the ideal. So I think we can do some research, we can do some design, we can do some validation that we can then say, hey, this is what we think. If we wanted to go all in on the problem, this is what would adequately solve all of these different facets of the problem. But we don't want to go all in on it. So what we're going to do is we're going to plan how we're going to do it. So for example, first, we're just going to throw an iteration that is very minimal and would only serve for us to get data on usage or to get qualitative feedback from users. But we've planned that, right? And we have all of the other things that we think we will do after that, but we're only doing this very first step.
You can jump if you need to. No, it's fine.
No, it's okay. And so we're only doing this very first step, but we're actually planning. So we're going to pause this feature work for, let's imagine, 2 milestones, 3 milestones until we get enough feedback. And what we're already doing is we're planning for two scenarios. Either one, we'll have to rethink the next iterations. So we're already blocking some time, 3 milestones from now, to rethink that work. Or if nothing new or surprising happens, we're just going to continue what we had already planned. But this is planned, right? And this is, I think, more intentional iteration than, and we're more intentional about what we're willing to learn from shipping something and trying to see if it sticks on the wall. Because what I think is that often we do that, okay, let's see if it sticks. And then if it does, we don't know necessarily what to do because it's so half-baked and we didn't have any plan for what to do next, that now we have to figure out how to shove that into our milestones. Yeah, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I think we're both saying the same thing differently. I think we both agree that like there needs to be a start and a stop point. And the question is like
Yes.
how far down the start and the stop point are. I think especially in this group, one of the things that I have learned and that you've been great at teaching is that like it's significantly harder to get away with like 1 milestone's worth of work in this group in a feature. It is significantly less tolerated. And so I think that's good. And I think like we need to know, like we need to know the next several milestones worth of work when we dive into an area. And I think like with the waiting for stuff or whatever we're calling it now, request attention. Man, attention set is a really good name.
I don't think it's trademarked. You can check it.
I don't want to get into that anyways.
No,
we should I think we would know, right? Like if we started down that path, like we sort of know, we know already based on the designs and the interviews that have been done, where we want to begin and where we're drawing a line of ending. We don't know, like we sort of have made some assumptions already that like people are going to ask for this and people are going to ask for this and people are going to ask for this, but we're not committed to doing any of those things even if we go down this path. And I think like that to me is fine. Like I'm okay with like that. I think the struggle in this group is one, being willing to say, this is what we agree to, this is what we're shipping, and we're okay stopping. Like we don't need to keep going. Mm-hmm. The counter to that is we also need to be much better about getting back to things than we are. Like we do not ever get back to things, which is why like when you look at the code review, like top level epic, you lose your mind because you're like, there's 400 open epics in like this group alone. One of them is Epic 1, which I get tagged on frequently, where people are like, did you know this is the first ever epic on GitLab? Like, what are you doing?
Just for that.
But so like, I think like we need to figure out how we get back to those things or be better about saying like, we're never getting back to those things or, and I think maybe that's the other piece of what you are struggling with and that we need to figure out how to address is like, how do we get okay with shipping part of the way and then recognizing that we're not going to get back to it? Or like, what is the signal we need to actually pivot and go back to those things? Like when there is that, given the like large amount of opportunity that we could spend time on.
Yeah. So that's what you were just saying, and taking the example of the waiting for or request attention, we are already aware that people can make some requests of certain nature after we ship this. With that knowledge and knowing that people can possibly ask about other cases, or even say that, or maybe get to the conclusion that most people don't want the drop down in the nav bar. They just want to click to go through the list because the list is amazingly useful. So they don't want the to click to be necessary. With this assumption, what we could do is already say, okay, we're going to give this some breathing room so that we can also understand what is a very quick reaction to the change, or what is a mature response over time. So let's say we wait 2 milestones, but we're already putting in the 3rd milestone after we ship this, we're already thinking about allocating some time to working on designing improvements to the waiting for or request attention. But we're not sold on that. Like, we're just saying we're already putting this time block in 3 milestones from now to do whatever it is we need to do as improvements to the waiting for, just because we know that it might be possible that we need to do some improvements, but we're not sure about the acceptance and how urgent these improvements are. And so as we get closer to that 3rd milestone, we're now able to say with more confidence, we need that time or we don't need it, and we're not going to do anything. So we're going to replace that time block with something else that we want to do. So I just think we need to, it's a little bit like, I have a task in my personal task manager that happens every 6 months to clean my dishwasher and put like a special product in there to clean it. But I know that once I complete that task, it will repeat again after 6 months after I complete it. So it's also always a reminder I need to do things, but maybe, I don't know, 6 months from now, I will say, I don't need to do it, so I won't do it anymore. But I just think we need to be more intentional about those reminders and setting time aside to work on things, because we have given enough learning room for us to learn about that, either from quantitative or qualitative feedback. But to do this properly and to be organized, and also because we're not a very big group, and it's only you, you're one product manager, and you can only think about so many things at the same time, and also all of us. That's why I don't think the throwing multiple things at the wall works, because it just creates a mess out of the planning and trying to forecast the iterations and what you will learn. And that's why I'm thinking, I'm not sold on the idea, but it's, what if we just focus on a couple of things per milestone? I mean, it will depend, of course. Maybe one milestone we won't do feature work. Maybe another milestone we will do 2 initiatives or 1. It doesn't matter, but just work on very the smallest number possible and be very conservative, but at the same time, we're actually being very ambitious on what problems we're solving.
Yeah, I mean, I think that in my head, that sounds like what we do currently. But I gather that you don't think that is what we do currently. So we have to figure that piece out. And I say that because when I think about the planning issues and what ends up on the board, there's usually one work stream happening, engineering work stream, but there's likely 2 or 3 work streams happening for you and I. And maybe that's the distinction that or between product and design, or in exploration or other things like that. Maybe that is sort of the difference. I don't think we jump around a ton, and if it feels like we are, then then maybe that's like the difference that we need to figure out.
Yeah, or maybe you already have, maybe it's just can be lack of communication. Maybe you already have all of these things planned out and I just don't know about them. Or maybe it's
Yeah,
I don't know if
yeah, I think maybe we should just figure that out. Like, and maybe like it would help maybe to get clarity on that. Like if you go through, and I don't know if you really want to do this, but if you were to go through like the last several milestones and sort of like highlight those cases of where it looks like we're slipping around, or like if it feels like we're jumping. And I know the last few milestones have been crazy, so like they're not good proxies, but like if you were to do that, maybe that would help us figure out like where that disconnect is. In my mind, and like I don't think we have any feature work currently underway, right? Like I guess maybe we start there. Like, would you agree with that?
yes, I agree with that.
Yeah. From like an engineering perspective. And maybe
Yes.
that's, yeah, from an engineering perspective, there's no feature work underway. And I think the last feature work this is complicated. The last feature work or the areas we've been in for feature work most recently were the viewed checkbox. And finishing out, I mean, I don't think we've touched reviewers since we launched it.
No.
No, we sort of like got through the last few things there and haven't touched it. We started exploring from a design and problem space. We started exploring the waiting for. We tried to continue iterating on tracking for persisting viewed state. We sort of got some like immediate feedback, but we actually haven't done anything there. Also, all we did was like the mark is viewed, and then we didn't do anything else. Which maybe that's like one of those where we should have kept going.
Maybe, yeah. Yeah, but that's the thing.
Like,
we weren't intentional about stopping.
Yeah.
Neither we were intentional. I mean, we were intentional about stopping because we had other things to do, so we were forced to do it. But we weren't intentional about let's use this about why we're stopping the marked as view. Like, are we stopping because suddenly we were faced with other things, or are we stopping because we are not going to do anything, or are we stopping because we're giving this breathing time to figure out what we need to do next, or here's some breathing time and we will use that breathing time to design and validate future iterations because we already kind of know where this is headed. So I think that's what's missing. And I'm actually, I think this is a great time to have this conversation because of what you said. We don't have any feature work in engineering right now, but this is rare in this group. So this is a rare time and we should take advantage of it to understand what we want to work on, how long, and be intentional about the starting and stopping moments and the confidence levels. And of course, we will never know exactly from the start, and we will learn as we go, and we will build our confidence over time about these things. But yeah, for example, like and we do, I don't think we need to continue and this discussion and to get to a decision. I think this discussion is good in of itself as food for thought, and maybe next week or we'll talk about this more. But for example, like, do we want to, for example, research the single file mode and learn more about that, and maybe plan for and understand if, like, for example, switching automatically to single file mode when it's a large merge request, does that make sense? Or maybe even highlighting the single file mode more so that we can improve people's perception of performance because they're only loading one file. The first file loads much faster. Or maybe that's not the feature that we want to dedicate. Maybe we want to dedicate ourselves more to the require my attention. Or maybe we want to look at the merge options, what I was saying in the beginning, like the squash commit messages, the default target branch, setting defaults for that. Like there's another issue that I saw somewhere, I didn't link here, that was to control whether users could delete the source branch at all. Like right now we have enforcing mechanisms for the squash, but not for the delete. The delete, you can only set the default, but someone can change that, or they can decide not to delete it or to delete it. And I've seen an issue where project owners want to decide and enforce a specific setting. So maybe we need to look at that problem space of enforcing certain practices of when merging. So yeah, whatever we decide, and that goes back to my first point about how do we balance all these things and where do we get these signals? Do we lean more towards the feedback that we have from customers? And I agree with what you said in the beginning of, like, the customers, like when I'm always using this story, but when Ford came out with the car, people wanted faster horses. So customers, sometimes they will not know what they want, or maybe they would say, I want this feature, but they want something else. But regardless of how we interpret those signals and that feedback, are we leaning more towards customers or towards prospective customers that want to migrate to the GitLab or want to upgrade licenses? And so we're going to favor those, or maybe we're going to favor our own practices internally, and the features that GitLab, the company, needs, or maybe we're just going all in on the popularity. I know it's a balance with all of these things, but I think, yeah, I'm just not sure if there's a clear prioritization for these things in these inputs, for us to know what to work on.
I think that's fair. And I don't have an answer for you, so I think that's fair. I think we have to figure out how to some sort of loose criteria to evaluate and measure those things to, like, make sure we're thinking about the right thing. So I can think on that.
So what if, before we do that, what if we just try to list somewhere, it doesn't matter where, a Google Doc, an issue, Epic, whatever, we try to list all of these problems or features that have come to mind, and that we think, like, out of all of these, a couple of them are the ones we should pursue, but we don't know which ones yet. And then from those, we try to understand the different signals. Like, for example, hey, this one has only been requested by a very big customer, or this one has only been voted by the community, or both. And that could make it easier for us to build a criteria around it for the prioritization.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Like, we could do a Google sheet to
Okay.
I mean, maybe we start with like a Google sheet that's like, here's some problem
That's
areas,
okay. Yeah.
and then figure out how to, like, add columns or do whatever to manipulate it at that point. I think that makes sense.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I listed some possibilities below of things that before the call came to mind. There are others, but these are the ones that it came to mind as requiring more UX exploration. But anyway, I think if we get started with that Google Sheet, and I think we could make some progress. Yeah, I think the first step is just putting everything on the table, look at it, and try to make sense of it, or just recognize that we can't make sense of it.
Yeah.
But I think we're
makes
aligned.
sense.
I think we agree on these things that we were talking about. So cool.
Okay. Yeah, well, I will create a Google Sheet and I will not put anything into it, and then I'll just do it now. At least we'll have one, and then we can start figuring out how to fill that out and go from there.
Okay, sounds good.
All right. Anything else you want to cover on the agenda, or no?
No. No, I was just looking at Amy's comment, but yeah, in this case, she's not here. It will be more of read-only. Yeah. Okay, cool. Thanks, Kai.
No, thanks, Pedro. It was good. Yeah, I'm excited to figure this out. I think it'll be good. So let's keep going.
Thanks, Kai. Have a good day. And if I don't see you before that, maybe, are you off tomorrow or only Thursday?
Starting Thursday, so I'll be around tomorrow.
Okay, I'll see you in the code review weekend.
All right. See ya.
Ciao, ciao.